and welcome to this week's review of the latest episode of My Hero Academia entitled Tartarus. Before we get into the review itself, I want to know what you thought about it, dear listener. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Let me know in the comment section down below, and you will get read out in next week's show. Whilst you're there, be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, click the bell, and do all the YouTube stuff that YouTube wants it to do, because YouTube is an increasingly scary place for small content creators. Support your local small content creator today, it will do them a power of good. Now, on to the review. Okay, so kicking us off, as we always do at the start of one of these reviews, we start off with the positives. And I have to say that I feel that the action stuff that we got within the first half was entertaining for what it was. It was a nice, thrilling slice of some really great spectacle and visual flair, with a decent sense of peril within it, as swift as all that stuff was. It was an action sequence itself, provided us with plenty of different variety. It allowed us to see a side of supervillain and superhero culture that we'd never really seen before in this program, what they do with the villains once they capture them, or at least what they do with the big bad people once they've caught them, and it was neat to see. It was a nice slice of world building, even if I will admit that I was expecting a whole lot more from this. I will admit that this is one of the many plot points that have been spoiled for me well in advance, so when I learned that there was going to be this big escape story from Tartarus, I expected something more. I expected something a little bit grander or longer lasting, something that would go on for at least an episode or two, and we didn't get that. It just all happened in one go, and I will admit, maybe not in the best way possible, but I'll discuss that when getting to the negatives. I will say that whilst we're still talking about the first half, I did enjoy the moment that we got with Spinner confronting Alpha Tomura, as I will call him in this current state, just talking about how this guy isn't the person that he followed, and just this sense of apprehension as to almost, as I mentioned previously, him thinking, what have I really let myself get in for? It was neat to see some of the villains that we'd seen earlier in the story back again. Speaking of Stain, we see him lurking in the background with a look on his face as though to say that he isn't on board with all of this. Like, he has a look on his face like, well, this is going to knacker up my parole hearing. Like, it would be great to see him fighting against the villains, though I doubt that will happen. Or at least having a moment where maybe he does go up to Spinner and he says, look, these guys aren't doing what I was planning to do. They just want to destroy everything. I wanted to just scorch earth and start again. That would be interesting. I don't think we're going to see that. And with all that said, I hope that we're not going to get some kind of moment where they try to reform and redeem Stain, because I don't think you can really do that with a character like that. He's a character that isn't one that you should really consider a hero in any regard. I don't see him as an anti-hero, and I think that if we go down that path, it's going to be unfortunate, we'll say that. It was also interesting to see Muscular, aka Bakugo's uncle again. Just saying that just reminds me of a video that I intended to make, but I'd canned it because it just kind of got depressing midway through. But hey ho, he's back, looking a bit worse for wear, but hey, I suppose it happens when you get Midoriya beating the crap out of you. And we saw Moonfish, again, a character who's supposed to be big, scary and intimidating, but he's one that I can't find scary or intimidating because, like 20 odd years ago, I made a comic with a little filler panel with the line "Moonfish scare me" as like an LOL random comedy humour thing that you'd often had in the early 2000s, and whenever I hear his name, I just think of that panel, I just think of that comic, and it kind of ruins it for me. I've ruined the character for myself, so that makes a change. Oh, we also saw Overhaul knocking about. Not that he can really do much. I mean, how's he feeling right now? Not with his hands. I mean, maybe they'll do a thing where he gets his hands back and he starts causing havoc. Maybe. Personally, I probably would have saved Overhaul for being a villain for a sequel series or something like that. Or maybe a villain in a movie, because here and now he's just kind of there. He can't really contribute much. Unless he's going to start sciencing things. But whatever, he's there. I think it's just more like a walking cameo. We get the blue-haired woman who's going to end up being the major villain of this particular half of the arc. Or the one who we're supposed to hate and the one that will probably get her comeuppance towards the end of it. But that's a speculation discussion for another time. I think the crowd shots that we got when the second half, when we were in the hospital, were interesting. Just seeing the public reaction to everything that has gone on was neat. I was worried as to actually how they'd line all of this up, going from everyone loving superheroes to everyone hating them, because I always felt that the abuse scandal with Dabi and the heroes failing to stop the villains, whilst grave and dramatic as that stuff is, it really didn't feel like it would be enough for me to really tip Hero Society over the edge like this, because there was always going to be some kind of scandal like this popping up sooner or later, and sooner or later there was always going to be some villain that was going to cause a lot of destruction that the heroes were going to fail to do. So it always just kind of felt like it was an inevitability when you take that in mind. So to see the other prison breaks happening, to see how things are starting to fall apart, yeah, it makes this work a lot better than I hoped it would have been. Even if, and I'm going off script ever so slightly here when I say this, I do think the idea of having My Hero Academia take place over the course of only about 6 or 7 months was a bad idea. I think it should be set over the course of years, because there's certain aspects of it which feel as though they're being rushed, particularly this stuff with Hero Society starting to fall down, but there's a discussion for a whole of a time. And I did enjoy what we got in the hospital for the most part. I will admit that I did dislike the fact that we're jumping focus from place to place, that we were going from character to character quite as much as we were doing. I wasn't a fan of the comedy moment at the start of it. It felt rather out of place for me, but that's just the way that it is at the moment. The entire episode just had that feeling of just being a little bit all over the place. So with that said, let us go into the negatives. Okay, so now getting into the negatives and echoing something that I said towards the end of last week's review, where I said that we really are getting into it, because we really are getting into it. I had fully expected that we would get an episode or two of a break, a little bit of a palate cleanser, something to help us shift gears, particularly bearing in mind just how intense and focused everything up until this point has been, and we haven't gotten that. We immediately go into all the Tartarus escape stuff. Like I said previously, I had this stuff spoilt for me well in advance, and I expected that would come along a little bit further down the line, that we'd have, again, a short period of a break for us to just adjust and let things settle, and for us to get more of an understanding of the true aftermath of everything that's gone on, that we would really get a chance to see just how things are starting to break down. When I had learnt that we were getting to go into the aftermath stuff of what had just gone down in the first half of this season, I thought, alright, so we're going to get like a couple of episodes dealing with the socio-political repercussions of this, the impact upon people's lives. We're going to get more of an example as to how this is impacting on superhero culture. And we haven't really gotten that. We've got elements of that, but it's been mostly stuff that's in the background. We haven't really had this shifting of gears. We're just really going full force into the next storyline without a single moment's breath. And that, for me, makes me feel rather exhausted at the moment. I feel that we really needed a bit more of a break before we got into this. We really need to see a little bit more about the aftermath stuff. Maybe we'll see that next couple episodes or so. I doubt it, because that feels like it would be clumsy, structurally speaking. I feel that we're just at a point now where we just have to keep going forward, because the stage has been set. We really can't pivot gear after this, because otherwise we're going to have people complaining about filler and about, oh, we should be seeing the Tartarus prison escape arc stuff. Which, if we shift gears, people are going to complain, because that's not happening, but that's a whole other discussion. I think that my biggest problem with this episode was the fact, and I will be brutally honest with you, dear listener, I think the pacing of this episode was frankly terrible, and is probably the worst paced episode I've ever seen of My Hero Academia. The first half of the episode was running far too fast for its own good, beyond the action sequence stuff, which seemed to end almost as soon as it started, to a point where it makes the whole Tartarus prison thing feel incredibly impotent and incompetent, but that's a discussion and a rant for a whole of a time. The exposition that we needed to go through was just dizzying. There was just so much of it, and it was being delivered in such a quick-paced way so as we could get everything out of the way, that it was almost dizzying. I feel that even if I had watched this dubbed, it still would have been a lot to take on, because at no point do we ever really get a moment to just let things settle and to let things breathe and to give us a chance to just take things on. Immediately we're moving place to place, thing to thing. We're learning about the history of Tartarus, what it is, where it gets its name from. Oh look, here's a villain you remember, here's a villain you remember, here's this backstory stuff with Tobra, here's him locked up in this mine prison thing, here's this, here's that, here's all these things. Oh, it's over. And it ends incredibly quickly. It ends so quickly that it almost makes it feel as though it almost could have just been done as a montage at this point, because if you're not going to spend the time to just let things settle and develop on them, almost what's the point in doing it like this at all? Because it just feels dizzying. It feels like I'm having my breath taken away at any given moment, and not in a good way. Just getting yanked and dragged from place to place, and it wasn't just in that part either. When we had the moment midway through the episode with Spinner, the brakes just slammed on, and we automatically changed pace again to something a little bit slow pace. But even there, we're being dragged from place to place to the point where I don't know where they're supposed to be. Are they supposed to be outside this mansion thing where that blood cult were earlier on? Or is it just a flashback thing to it? Is it just a case of him thinking back to that place and what the being in the League of Villains means to him? I really don't know. Maybe it is, but either way, it's so poorly delivered that it's hard to really get a gauge as to where anyone is. And then we end up shifting gears again with the stuff in the hospital. We have that awkward moment of comedy, which, hey, I'll be brutally honest here and say this show desperately needs more jokes in it. But if we're gonna have jokes, they shouldn't be shoehorned in quite like this. I mean, maybe it worked a lot better in the manga, but here and now, in an episode like this, it feels painfully out of place. But even beyond that, with the stuff we got in the hospital, we were just being dragged from place to place again, not letting what's happened with our heroes really have time to settle. Like, I feel that this is another case, and I've said this time and again this season, where we have what could have been two separate episodes being smashed together to the detriment of both. Maybe I really don't know how that came to be. I really do not know, and maybe that's something I'll discuss when we get into the season-long review in a few weeks' time, but here and now, it's just rather alarming this has happened. It must have been a time constraint thing. It must have been a case of, right, you're getting 25 episodes and not one episode more, and they just had to work with what they have. I really don't know, because here and now, it just feels like a bit of a mess. As far as the overview itself is concerned, I feel this episode was... It had good moments within it, but I feel that it felt terribly disjointed, and the pacing of it was just all over the place. I hate to repeat myself, but this really was what should have been two separate episodes smashed together to the detriment of both halves of it. The Tartarus stuff could have easily been its own mini arc, but it wasn't. It was just a half of an episode. And the Fallout stuff with what happened with our heroes, again, could have been its own half. Could have been its own episode, rather. Hey, maybe the better solution would have been just to swap them round. Do all the stuff in the hospital first, and then do the prison escape stuff, because at that point you're starting to pick up gear, starting to pick up speed, rather than starting insanely fast with all this exposition, and then shifting gears to something a lot more slower and a lot more sedate. Maybe that would have been better. You'd have had to tweak the story ever so slightly, but hey, I'm sure they would have done it. They have the original author on hand to make the changes as necessary. But that is a whole of discussion for a whole other time. Now it's time to get into Comment Corner. Okay, now it's time for Comment Corner, and we kick off with Big X1, who says, I didn't mind the recap stuff. It made me appreciate just how much had happened in the arc so far, and that second half of the episode was heavy on the feels. And I agree, I feel that the second half of last week's episode was terribly heavy, and it was nice to get a reminder of things that happened, even though I feel that it does highlight a few areas of potential disappointment, as I thought that certain characters would have had more of a time to shine, but that is a discussion for a whole other time. Next we have Silver Atlas, who has left two comments, and I'm going to do them as one right now. We have them saying, about the Redestro scene, it was going on at the same time as the Rays. The Redestro clone dissolved because at that time Twice died. The point of the scene was to show how hero society is leaderless, and these heroes are now lost on what they can do next. Next episode will show this point more. Honestly, this episode had no right to be as good as it was. Having almost half the episode recap should have tanked it, but not only was the recap handled well, in my opinion, it really added a lot of details, but the actual content was done amazingly. I generally excuse war arc recaps because we already didn't get a first episode recap this season, because that's happened. I'm sorry, I'm just mangling this bit, but you can read the end of it. I'm sorry, it's the dyslexia thing, and I've been recording this now for over an hour. And thank you again for the comment. Sorry for mangling it towards the end of it, but yeah, first of all, thank you for the clarification as to what happened with Redestro in the first comment. The way that it was presented to me in that moment, it felt like it was something that was happening prior to the raid, rather than it was happening around the same time as it. Maybe something I missed in the cycle. Maybe there was a caption that I missed somewhere along the lines of it. And as far as the second half of the second comment goes, yeah, I agree. The actual content of last week's episode was brilliant. It does make up for the recap stuff, in my opinion. even though, again, I feel as though it highlights certain things that I think should have been elaborated upon, though. Next up, from the last week's comments, we have Scott TV Gamer, who says, "You'd be surprised how many older people actually don't pay attention and easily forget certain parts so easily, making the recap stuff somewhat necessary. Not saying your criticism of the recap stuff is bad or wrong at all, though, which itself is a fair comment, and I will admit that when it was showing us stuff from the previous half of the season, I will admit there was certain stuff that I had forgotten about and certain characters I had forgotten about, mostly due to those characters not being utilised in a way that I thought they would have done. Like the Meta Liberation Army's Ice Dude, the way they were building up towards the end of last season was like he was going to be some kind of rival for Shoto, and that just didn't happen. He appeared, he made some ice appear, and then he just kind of disappeared in the background, which just kind of, again, highlights the fact I think the Meta Liberation Army is a faction that has just been horribly underutilised. And from the Season 6 review so far video, we have Vanterwave, who says, "Not sure if this has been mentioned, but the spinner content was meant for My Villain Academia, the very beginning of My Villain Academia. But I have no idea why it was put very late into the war arc. I don't mind it, but it doesn't add anything new. Redestro was supposed to have a commercial around My Villain Academia as well, but that got cut. And thank you for the comment." And the whole stuff with Spinner's backstory stuff with that blood cult stuff was something I had been made aware of a little while ago. Maybe at least a week before it was actually shown in the anime. And I think that its inclusion was fine. I think it's a little bit too early for me to really speculate as to why it was moved. Maybe it was dropped for a time, as maybe the cliffhanger stuff towards the end of last season wouldn't have worked otherwise, but that is a whole other point of discussion for a whole other thing. And I will admit, I would have liked to have seen Redestro's commercial thing. I think that would have been fun. But I think that might have set me up for more disappointment, because I was expecting a lot more from the Meta Liberation Army and from him. I was expecting more of an OCP Robocop kind of thing from them, which we didn't get. And, you know, I don't want to be one of those people that talks about what they would have liked to have seen and what they feel should have been done. But that would have been neat. That would have been neat. But anyway, thank you all for your comments. If you would like to leave a comment, leave it in the comment section down below, and I will get back to you both in the comments, and you will be read out in next week's show. Thank you all for listening, and see you next time. Goodbye! Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell, and do all the YouTubey stuff that YouTube wants you to do. Go on, it'll do me a power of good. Until next time, my friends, goodbye!